On this week's Bet the Process podcast, we go in a slightly different direction. We have Kris Abdelmessih from the originally from the Risk of Ruin podcast is how we found out about him. But he's like this brilliant trader that grew up in the SIG days, and he gives Rufus a little tutorial on how to trade. So maybe it helps him in his Kalshi performance. So with that, let's start the process. We now welcome in Kris Abdelmessih. It's funny because when I sent that text out about, or that I sent an whatever his tweet out about having a non-sports betting person on, you were the person I thought about most, but I thought that was kind of the cliche answer. And then when John went over the top and suggested you, it seemed like the perfect thing. So thanks for joining us.
Of course, of course. I'm a fan of your show, so this is pretty dope for me.
Oh, well, one of the seven, always welcome on our show. So quickly, for those people who didn't hear, and obviously a lot of people discovered you on the Risk of Ruin podcast, which is like a sister cousin podcast to this podcast, and an unbelievable tale of just coming through your time at SIG and just the trading and the evolution of trading. By the way, I was a little disappointed in that episode that when you were mentioning like OG firms, you didn't mention O'Connor, which I worked at. So,
Oh, I didn't. So I didn't know that. But you know who? The first guy I worked for was Reggie Brown.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
he's
don't know who that is.
Reggie was he was an O'Connor guy, and now they put him on the cover of Institutional Investor probably not that long ago as the godfather of ETFs. He is
Wow.
he was like the biggest market maker in the SPY stock SPY when
Well,
I clerked for him.
why do you think like, so obviously O'Connor got swallowed up by Swiss Bank and UBS and whatnot. Do you think they would have flourished like SIG if they had stayed independent, or what do you think about the difference between those two? And this is like complete inside baseball to people.
Yeah, so you know, I think there was this, I think it was this moment in 2000. So I can't, O'Connor, my knowledge of O'Connor, like they're sort of like before me. I started in 2000, so kind of precedes me a little bit. But my sense of what happened in 2000 was when I got hired, I think we were just options trading was leaving this like cottage industry. Like the floor was basically this ragtag of misfits where like it was maybe somebody's dad owned the company and you worked there and you had no business really sort of being there otherwise. And then there was like the savant chess players, right? So it was just this that couldn't hold a regular job. So you have this like all these misfits. And it's like this cottage industry. Like you make a couple hundred grand a year in the 90s sort of doing this. And then all of a sudden options volume like explodes. We're going into decimalization. They start listing electronic markets and the dot-com stuff really kind of just ramps up all the volatility. And I think what had happened was you basically had a bunch of mom and pop shops that found themselves in the center of really big business. And then the banks started intruding on the business. They started taking a lot more risk, trading against their customers. And I think ultimately the story was one of technology and the necessity of scale. Like you basically needed to invest all your like just invest tremendous amounts of your profits back into the tech. And I guess it was you could either do that and play the really long game and take a very speculative bet that obviously paid off huge if you were, like the SIGs of the world or Jane Street who came out of SIG. But at the time, remember like Spear Leads sold themselves to Goldman for $5 billion. I mean, you could have just taken the bid. And, they ended up writing down that investment, but all that stuff it was super frothy as the banks were basically trying to buy these companies. Like, I don't know if SIG ever entertained a bid for the company, but I don't know if you were O'Connor, you would have to know something about the management. Were they the kinds of guys that were like, hey, we're going to put all this money back in and get into this technological arms race, which is probably what the future looks like? Or do we want to just cash out of this? Like, as far as their trading know-how, I see no reason why they couldn't necessarily have succeeded. It's just the question is like, what was their appetite? Like, why did they get acquired by Swiss Bank in the first place? I don't know about what the reasons for that, but were they just cashing out?
Yeah, it's like a broader, interesting question about like I've like been lucky enough to sell, 4 different startups, and everyone always thinks like, oh, that's such a great result, right? But it isn't always, right? Like, because ultimately, like when you get a company acquired, it means that it's almost like an end, right? And ultimately, like what Sig has done, that's the dream of every founder, right? To build something that has that kind of a legacy. No, in my mind, no good founder builds a company to sell it. Because if you are, then you just shouldn't start a company, right? In my mind, at least. So it probably is a mentality. I think that's an interesting answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I just think about like, if you sell your company, you're kind of saying that, my like return on investment capital here, like I would rather take the cash and allocate it somewhere else rather than just keep putting it right back into this business again. Like if you're SIG, what were you doing? You're going to look around at other things and be like, would I rather cash out and then be forced to find something to invest in, or just keep plowing money back into this amazing machine?
Yeah.
Or sometimes the founder wants to do something else, have a new challenge. And I think a lot of founders kind of like that mentality of being small and growing, which I think once you get to a certain point, as you know, Jeff, right? Like it kind of changes, right?
I mean, it always, but again, like that's why like the Sig story is, in my mind, the dream, right? Because they've gotten themselves to a point where when they want to do something different, they just do it themselves, right? They do it within Sig, right? And they've bought
Different, but
themselves.
in the same broad area.
I mean, if you're not doing something in the same broad area, you're either a unicorn that has incredible skills, or you're leaving your depth and you're really challenging yourself, right?
Yeah,
So
I
Well,
mean,
and they can do that because they're not public, right?
absolutely.
That's,
yeah.
I think once you go public, you're no longer necessarily steering the ship.
Yeah,
What do you
I
think
think
that?
what you're right, Jeff, about it's like SIG sort of being the dream in the sense that they've effectively they're private and they have enough capital to effectively do anything they want to do, which is like I mean, you can say I want to go do something else, but it's like you can do whatever you want. I mean, they have the ultimate. They're just so unconstrained. It's got to be. I agree. It's like feels like the dream to have pulled that off. I mean, but obviously it's as rare as it is, where there's not that many companies that are sitting like that.
What do you think Sig's, and I've heard you talk about this, so I don't want it to be the same answer as I've heard, but what do you think Sig's like secret sauce is, in terms of like if you were to boil down one thing that made them successful, and maybe not in the early days, just generally successful, what would you say it is?
I think probably just they're just so unrelenting about the culture of finding edge and constantly questioning like is what I'm doing actually in an edge and understanding risk. Like I think at the end of the day, they're just it is that cliche in a sense of like find one thing and take it seriously, or I always forget kind of who said that, but I just think they're sort of the epitome of that. It's like, I'm going to take this idea of edge and I'm going to look for it and everywhere where it can be. And then I recognize that if I manage my risk, there's no way I cannot succeed in the long run if I have conditional on having an edge. And I think they just take that extremely seriously. And then so what they do there is they make their employees very focused on this idea of like they're constantly challenging each other. So it's like this culture where you can disagree. I mean, I think a lot of places may or I haven't been at a lot of places, so I maybe a lot of places pay lip service to that because I know it's a talk. Like everyone says that, hey, I want to create a culture where we can disagree and then not be salty when we leave the room. But I really felt that that was true there. And I'll say this, I ended up spending the rest of my career with a number of ex-SIG people. Like I went to Parallax and there was a contingent of ex-SIG people there. And that culture existed there as well, as far as like being on the desk. And my best friend in the world is probably somebody I can just argue with all day. All we do is fight.
Yeah,
So I
great.
think that's a very SIG thing.
Yeah, and it's a very, when you have people that are very smart, I think that's very hard because everyone's very strong-willed and like, strong opinions, loosely held kind of thing.
And
If
I
you,
imagine it's also tougher as you get bigger too.
That I think is so that's the most magical part to me is like I think, how did they do that? How did they maintain that culture as they scaled? I think even if you listen, if I remember listening to Jeff on a podcast recently, he had kind of said something along those lines of he pointed exactly to the need to be able to do that, or maybe it was Todd Simkin, but they were kind of saying that what you think of the job to do changes as you grow. And so they realized at some point that they were going to have to think very deeply about that exact problem. So I don't think you can take it for granted that anybody can cross that chasm.
I think it's a fascinating idea of people being able to challenge each other and in that culture, obviously. And this kind of brings me to like, if we were to have one universal question on this podcast that I don't think we've ever really answered, it is, what do you do when you are in a losing streak or when you are like, and you question your model or you like, how do you cope with that? And again, like how, when do you think about things being non-stationary and like, has there ever been a time where you've had something where you've been like, I can't beat this. I like clearly have. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe an example of like that kind of a journey? Because like sports betting is the ultimate one where no matter how good you are going to go through really bad losing streaks. And so, how does one deal with that?
Yeah. So I think the answer for like the simplest, maybe the simplest domain might be something like where the odds of what you're doing are sort of pretty well defined. Like think like a simple gambling game where it's like if
Like
I had a
blackjack.
yeah, like if you had to run
Oh,
like
system.
X, Y, or Z, you'd be like you'd Bayesian update and be like, that's out of bounds, and that's probably out of bounds in a way where like maybe the deck is stacked or whatever it is. Like in other words, like some statistical concept of of this is unusual or bad. But that's not really the domain that we're dealing with in trading, and a lot of times it's a lot hairier than that. So I would say the first thing is to start from paranoia, which is I always I spent 20 years being like, I'll probably be out of a job next year. Like it's just it's going to get too smart, it's going to get too figured out. It's I can because you are always in the business of trading watching things get harder. There are
Mhm.
like if you think about like any sort of like analytical edge, it looks like a line that goes from like the upper left to the lower right over time, but it bounces around like that. So there are times when you have like a nice little run and you get all excited and you're like, hey, this like thing that I was like always doing is no, it's awesome. It's a kind of it really is amazing. It was just a lull, but the reality is like it just gets harder and harder over time. And that is just the nature of the business. So I think if you start, first of all, from this very adversarial, paranoid position of I expect that people are going to get better and figure this stuff out. So once you're doing that, it's like I think there's an element to that balances you when it gets bad because you partially expect it. And then what you do in practice is you go back to your basics because I can point to exactly what happens when I start to run bad. It's because I become a little bit more of a hero. I'm a little bit, this is what a good trade looks like to me. I'm buying this. I'm buying this here because this other thing is bid there. Or I'm selling this here because this other thing is offered cheaper. And I like selling this versus buying that. Or a conversation where somebody says, I would like to buy that. And I'm thinking to myself, I would sell you that because I can buy this other thing. That is like the grammatical form of a good trade in my mind. When I'm running bad, it's because I start to say things like, wow, vol looks cheap here. Like it's no
Opinion.
longer what's the other side of this or what's the relative side of this? It's now we're drifting into I'm drawing lines in the sand. And where do these lines in the sand? Where must have they have come from? Probably history in some chart. But that history and chart is never aware of the fact that the world is changing and it's adversarial. A good so like a real life example of this was when I was trading natural gas. And natural gas in this is like 2000, late 2010, 2000, early 2011. So we get I was running a market making business in natural gas options. It was the only thing I was trading. I would go to the floor every day and I would trade gas options in the pit, and I had somebody upstairs that I would talk to, and they would trade the screens and everything. Now, vol was like on a steady bleed from like 80 down to 40. And I remember at 40, like taking the biggest long we had like put on vol wise, and then ended up just, eating crap on that down to like 32. And then eventually like puked it at 32. It never really came back. And then we just basically went back to checking our assumptions. And then you start reading and you're like, you know what? There's this thing called shale that probably put a lid on product, or like it's created so much production, it has put a lid on the price. It has removed the right part of the distribution of the price. So what is that going to do to the volatility? It's going to absolutely destroy it. So, and then we looked at the landscape and said there are too many market makers that business is predicated on this being an 80 vol name, that there's no way it can sustain at a 40 vol at 40 vols. Like there's too many predators, not enough prey in this market. So we close the books and you work out of the positions, and we close the gas book, and then we basically took our infrastructure and pointed it ironically at silver, because that was the first time silver had went to $50. But the point was, you run bad enough and like it may come back, but you also need to look at the picture and be like, is this thing different now? And I couldn't give you a recipe for doing that. The whole nature of it is that it doesn't happen all that often, that things change forever. But the only defense you had against that in the first place was that you couldn't have is sizing, right? Like it's the most robust form of risk management at the end of the day. Like I couldn't bet everything on this at 40, at 40 vol. So the only thing that kept me alive was just some sense of risk management.
Knowing that you could be wrong.
Yeah.
Rufus, do you have
I
a
mean,
good analogy
there's
from?
so much good stuff you said there
No, no, I
that
know,
I
but do you
found
have a good
really
analogy
interesting.
from sports about this whole idea of like when you put on a trade? Because I feel like there's
Well,
some really good
yeah,
examples
it
of that.
almost sounded like, well, it said like you're anchoring, you're anchoring to some other price, or I mean, it was sort of like a know where your alpha comes from in a way,
Yeah.
right? Your alpha doesn't come from saying vol is cheap or something like that.
Well, it's also like
And
historical too, right? Like something historical that could change versus something relative that's at the same time, almost like.
exactly, which is a lot of like top-down bettors, it's get themselves in trouble if they start to say, "Oh, I have, an opinion on this," rather than being like, "I'm going to buy this because this other price tells me that it's a good bet."
Hmm.
Um, but I also 100% relate to the idea that you're always like, "When is this going to dry up?" Like I feel like I think that every single year, and it
I
gets
would
harder and
think that
harder.
it's actually I've thought about this, like sometimes when I think about this and I listen to you guys and think about sports betting, I often think that that feeling must feel even stronger in sports than it probably doesn't. Just because trading has there's a what used to be called time place advantage, but they're like sort of like once you're in it, there are some like structural advantages. Like the customers, the flow. Like there's some like institutional stitching there that acts as some sort of barrier. And
Mhm.
when I look at it from this could just be me being naive about sports betting, but when I look at sports betting, I'm like, those barriers are probably smaller and would make everything more precarious.
Right. And when your source of alpha is basically originating better models than other people, I think, you know, it's not going to last forever. It can't. At least, but I think maybe this is a good segue into sort of prediction markets, because like what my team is working on a lot more now is something where there is more of a barrier, like doing automated market making using our models that we originate as well as the market, and being able to capture softer recreational flow and building infrastructure that's going to be harder to easily for somebody to easily replicate. And there's certainly going to be a big amount of time they'd have to invest into that.
That makes is that this is a question as an outsider a little bit, but like, is it the case that do you look at this as like before basically the idea that you can trade with it, like you don't have to go through a middleman like an agent or a bookie where you can't get down and all that. Like, is that one of the most compelling things about all this? Is that you're sort of peer-to-peer trading?
To me, that's not the most compelling thing. I mean, the most compelling thing is that it's a different world. It is, it's a whole, I mean, there's this whole different game about it, right? Trading and like deception and disguising what you're doing. And that does exist in the sports betting realm too, but in the actual sports betting realm, so much more is just logistics. Finding, relationships, people that can do volume for you, and it's I don't know, it's a little more boring in a way. Whereas um there's so much nuance I feel like to trading that I'm just learning, and it's an entirely different game, and it's which has been motivating to me because I've been doing the same thing for so long. It's nice to have something else that really is stimulating me. Like there's a lot of creativity involved. There's like you have to think through edge cases, and I mean building a I mean any sort of automated market making thing, I think is you're fraught with peril, right? There's the
Yep.
difference between playing defense and playing offense and knowing when you're in each mode. And there's certainly times when we're in modes where we are just you're trying to capture softer action versus and don't have much of an opinion. And there's times when we are playing offense and we're less price sensitive and willing to just, we're just trying to get filled big. Um,
Right.
and yeah. So what have you done? Have you done anything personally on any of these prediction markets?
I have not. I don't trade on the prediction markets. Occasionally I'll look at them just to be like, what is the referendum on this or that idea? It's funny I think on when we got connected, you guys had asked for somebody that like doesn't that's not a non-gambler,
Yeah.
and it is
Well,
interesting like
not a non-gambler, but
the
non-sports. Yeah.
non-sports. So the it's
Trading.
actually interesting because I've never actually been, despite trading, I felt like the gambling part of my life. So first of all, I did used to trade a little bit on trade sports way back in the day. And there was the period of my life, and this was when I read like Bringing Down the House, and I think everybody my age that's been in trading probably has like a bookshelf of like all the David Sklansky and poker books and Amarillo Slim story and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But it was like a 2 years of like immersion in everything related to sort of gambling when I was at SIG as a trainee. 'Cause it's kind of like the culture of it, and you were on the two. I remember, I mean, I learned so much from like the 2+2 forums back in the day, and there was a bunch of
Yep.
quants that were in those forums. So I used to dabble a little bit in like on trade sports and all that back then. But now that it's weird because it's like a lot of this prediction market stuff is all things that were internally at SIG, was like all stuff that they were excited about many, many years ago. And it's kind of crazy to see it all emerge. But um, I haven't really dove in and like started trading on it or anything like that. It's just occasionally like just looking at the prices. So I don't have any knowledge about like how to market make on it or anything.
Well, I have a bunch of questions related
Yeah.
to comparing to traditional
Mhm.
financial markets, et cetera. But what I'll start with, what do you think institutional market makers get wrong?
What do
And because I think all this applies, yeah.
Seems like a leading question, Rufus.
I'm not sure how much they
Or
get wrong if they're still around.
what are, I guess, okay, so what are the biggest mistakes that I guess a new market maker
Hmm.
um, make would make?
I think that the biggest mistake a market
That's like
maker.
hashtag asking for a friend, by the way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's the biggest mistake is the obvious one, which is to provide too much liquidity at the wrong price because you are not appreciating adverse selection to the degree that you should be. I mean, which I hate that answer because it's like totally trite, but I mean, it is the answer. Uh,
But
so
to
go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I mean, I agree that like I thought you were going to say something related to adverse selection, but I think well you know put yeah you get much more adversely selected if you are putting up bids that are way too big for the
Yeah,
for a
I'll give
market.
you, let me, this is like a story that this is so I was not, other than there was a couple years where I used to make markets on the screen when I was in the gas options and stuff like that, or the guy who worked for me did it. But I would say that the whole business of like making markets on the screen is, even in traditional finance and equity options, there's a bit of an illusion to it. And this is like, I remember being listening to a trader on a panel at like a SIBO conference. And it was on one of these exchanges where the matching engine was pro rata. So you got, there
Interesting.
was no priority based on time. It was like you were basically how much size you showed, you got filled in proportion to how much size you were willing to show.
But
So
wait, doesn't that aren't the incentives really misaligned there then? Because so nobody wants to be first.
well, what ends up happening is everybody ends up having to post more size than they want to trade, if you want to trade at all.
Hmm.
So if you want to get any volume, you need to post more volume than you want to trade. So I remember on the panel, this guy was saying like their firm had like done an analysis. It was something like there was adverse selection if you were filled on more than 14 contracts. Like everybody's posting because they just want to trade the ones and twos. Nobody actually wants to take on the 500 lot in options or
Hmm.
the 50 lot or options. But I think the thing to me that blew my mind was how low that threshold was. So he's saying you have all these people posting all this size and all this, like, so the liquidity is all phantom. Like nobody's actually there for that posted size. They're doing it on those exchanges because they have to get to trade anything. But so which leads back to like the ultimate sort of the mistake everybody, the most universal mistake in trading, which is to assume that there's more liquidity than there actually is. Now, yeah. So, and this is, I don't know what is an analogy in
Oh,
uh
for sure. I think there is.
in prediction markets, because I think of something like in in stock options or in options, like the underlier itself is a form of liquidity because you can replicate an option by like this thing called delta hedging. So there's some form of way of like, even if there was no option market at all that you could trade in, you are stopped out of your ability to sort of like buy and sell the underlying in some proportion that replicates the option. The problem there is like that's not really true for an option that is for like a 1 year option. So what happens is people can get lulled into thinking like the 1 year option is like super liquid and it's but what'll happen is like what happens when there's like market clearing, when there's a market clearing of COVID being like the most classic example of recent history. It's a market clearing event. And so you watch an option that was 50 cents go to $6. And it's not like it's temporarily at $6. It's like, guess what? That's over. You have a 1 year position on your books, on your inventory that just uh, went up by a factor of 10 and you're not getting it back. Like the world changed. So it's like you can be fooled into being like, well, the markets were all like reasonably tight on this option for years and years and years. And then a market clearing event happens and it's like, now this thing is on your book. And the question is like, how good of a use of capital was it to make a dime per contract on that 1 year option when if everything goes wrong, you're wearing it and it's now tying up your capital. So I think those are the kinds of questions that might be they're under considered maybe. Like I being a market
It's
maker when I was had my business on the floor, here's something about that. Like you're running an options book and you've got inventory all over the place. Like you have all these expirations and all these strikes and all these different assets you might be trading. But at some one point in the future, you're not going to do the business anymore. Like you don't know. It could be in 10 years, it could be in 1 year. You don't know when it is. Well, the cost to get out of your business is very expensive because you're going to have to pay the cost one way or the other. It's like you're either going to have to pay another market maker take all my inventory, and I'm going to have to pay you a nickel a contract and get out of all this inventory, which is going to could cost me, 6 months to a year of expected profits to do something like that. Or I can waste the next 6 months of my life working out of all of these positions and not getting to put on any new trades for edge. So, and like nobody really thinks about that when they're going into like doing this business. There's this big exit tax. And what that's about is liquidity. When you are in the job of providing liquidity, you are in the business of like doing this service for other people. And the question is when are you going to need that service? So I think just thinking about maybe some of those elements as you get into this is worth a thought.
Yeah, I mean, so what came into my head when you said that is something with golf actually, and it's just thinking about sort of tail risk and there's a chance a golfer withdraws before an event begins, like after they were announced for tee times and everything like that, and it happens. You know, I have no idea actually how frequently it happens. Maybe every other week. Like golfers always withdraw Monday, but like maybe the day before, it's a little more rare. But the way Kalshi has their market structured for golf, uh, if a golfer withdraws before the event begins, then the market grades to a no. So if it's as if they didn't win, they didn't get in the top 5 or top 10 or make the cut, right? And so if I was to seed every market both ways, like
Mm.
on each, my chance of a golfer withdrawing is so small, and you could price that in. But what you can't really overcome is the fact that if you're bidding yes on every single guy, like if just one guy withdraws, you're going to lose 100% on that. You're going to get adversely filled there, and it's worth literally zero. Um, and so
And
it's
you're short the field for something less than 100 also, and the field wins.
so I mean, for me, I was just like, it just doesn't make sense to bid on the yeses, at least in that kind of sense, or with leaving
Yeah.
it up for any length of time, unless I actually want to take a yes, or you know,
And you're worried about like people just beating you to that, like that market being up there and that
oh,
happening
if
and
it's
people
up
beat
there
you.
and I have too much liquidity on it, right? If Patrick Cantlay withdrew before the tournament and I had yes offer for 50,000 contracts, I lose, someone is probably going to snap that up, take the no, before I'm able to take it down.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
just
I'm
super
not
asymmetrical. That one's super because somebody can't know that it's a yes, but they can know it's a no.
exactly.
Yeah. So, uh,
And so, I mean, I gave Costly the feedback. I was like, I think you all need to, if you want liquidity on both sides, you really need to change it so that if there's a withdrawal, any trades that happen after that announcement are voided or something like that.
what have they, well, tell
No,
me
they
how.
said they're looking into it.
Yeah.
They're they understand the issue.
Yeah.
What,
So you,
what,
you really can't really show much liquidity on bids. So what is that market like? What's the natural flow? Is there like a natural flow in that market, or people like tend to pile into one person? Like, what does that even look like?
Well, this week everybody piled into Brooks Koepka to win in the Brooks Koepka markets. It's his first event back on the PGA Tour after I guess it was 3 years on Live, and he's a 5-time major winner, something like that. It's about the most public spot there is, and I realized I got a lot of fill there. I have I think close to $400,000 bet against him and 355,000 on him not to win the tournament. And um, I was a little impatient and kind of didn't think I was far enough back in the I would have been too far back in the queue at, like, for example, 98 cents, that I didn't think I was going to get filled. So I mean, I made his price of winning less than 1 in 200, and I jumped to 99 cents. I got 150,000 filled there. And I was like, okay, that's enough there. I'll get in the back of the line at 98 cents for 200,000 contracts, not thinking there was any chance I'd get filled just based on normally how far, like the normal flow you see. And I got the entire thing filled. Like, and
So
so
what is so you're risking 355 to win what roughly?
I could pull it up.
Yeah, I want
Um,
to know.
I'm
I want to
winning,
know when this happens.
risking 350 to win five, basically. Hey, but my position's up 1400 right now. Although the thing is with the portfolio there, it's if you're on something at 99 cents, it's never, until it grades, it's never going to show as a positive expected value, like because it's all based on the last trade and there's no
Hmm.
decicents. And so the last trade can only be 99 cents.
Right.
So Chris, why haven't you gotten involved in sports and what are you doing right now?
Wait, but
Yeah. So I don't get involved in sports because I don't, it's like,
why
it
would
would
he?
be, it would, it's like, that's a life, it's like, it would consume your life. Like, how would you, I wouldn't want to do it if I'm not going to be, you know, good at it. So how am I going to be good at it if this is not going to be my entire life? And it's like, I guess I'm
So
just
why
saying I
not
just have a
trading
tremendous amount
options?
of respect for doing it. Like trading is not a, if you want to trade for like real, like this is what you're going to make your living on, like true edge alpha, yada, like it's not a part-time thing. And it's like, I mean, I left trading because I don't want that to be the cadence for my life. Like would I ever go back to it? Possibly. But for now, I don't want to be doing that. And it is all consuming. So it's not, so sports is, uh, and if I were to go back to it, sports would definitely be very low on the totem pole of what I would want to go do. I mean, from
Not the most
everything
lucrative thing.
I'm not like cursed with overconfidence where I'm just like, oh, I'm going to go there and be good at that. I literally look at that. I'm like, I have no idea how I would compete in doing that and how much like amassed knowledge you guys have that it would be like a lifetime to even catch up. Like it just doesn't seem
Well, but
feasible.
Okay, wait, wait.
I
I
think
would,
that with the prediction markets, there is like a real element to trading right now in terms of at least right now while things are kind of frothy. And like I would guess like if Rufus paid you a lot of money, you hung out with him for like 8 hours and looked at his models and everything like that, you could probably give him a lot of pointers that he would
That's a
so
great
like my point
idea.
is like I think that
I'll hire you, pay you a lot of money for a day.
that's 8 hours is in
Yeah.
my mind.
you know what? That's so okay. I still think it would be just because I would, yeah, I think like where I could maybe be helpful is more on like the thinking about the trading aspect of it, not on the obviously not. I guess when
Right.
you posed it to me, I thought about it from the model point of view. Like,
Well,
oh,
yeah, you're talking about
Right,
like
no, right
directional
now,
trading versus like you're talking about directional trading and volatility trading versus like this is like the early days when you're like, oh, I can do a synthetic put and get arbitrage right now because these people don't understand how to,
hmm,
do
right.
the create the synthetic put or whatever, right?
Right now, there are market makers that have no idea what the price should be of something, and they are making money, I believe, at least some of them, um, just by just using the book and understand and the behavior of other participants to sort of capture order flow. And so I think that well, my question was going to be like, what are the difficulties like in sort of a market like that for someone like, let's say a Jane Street comes in, like to market make on something they don't have expertise on.
so I think that the way they can overcome the difficulty is they can. I think that the question there is like, is the juice worth the squeeze for them? Is probably the biggest one because what they can do is they can go acquire the expertise because they can just pay people whatever they want and hire them. And I mean, we do, and but I mean, there are like we do see the job listings now, like SIG hiring sports traders, and like there is a probably a growing market for hiring people that want to be trading sports. I think the I don't know how big that business is right now, but maybe it's in the sweet spot where it's like it's not really worth Jane Street and Jump's effort to be the decide they're going to take those markets over. But if they just if it gets to that point, there'll probably be a point where they it will be extremely competitive, and you're kind of in a it's like what happened in crypto. It's like there was a bunch of money
Yeah.
to be made in crypto, and then like Jump shows up, and it's like, if you talk to whenever I've talked to anybody that was like there, it was like, man, it was like money used to fall from the sky. It's gotten a lot harder. I'm like, but this is like the natural progression of things. I would expect the same exact thing to happen in prediction markets. So you can, uh, it's just this question, like you got to make hay where the sun is shining. And
Yeah.
if it gets really big, like you'll be like a victim of your own success. It's like it's going to attract the big guys, but the big guys probably not worth it their time. I mean, right now they're paying people $500,000 out of college. Um, so how much resources are they going to be able to throw at this? How big is the opportunity? So I think that's I don't know so much how much they're challenged as it just doesn't make any sense for them to probably do it.
No, I agree. I was saying if they do decide to do it, what do you think they're immediately going to be really good, or
I
is
would
there a
expect
learning
them to
curve?
be. I would expect Jane Street Trader. I would expect Jane Street to be very good at it right off the bat because they're they are very good at operating in environments where they know that they don't know everything. And so they're not, in other words, you're dealing with somebody that's not going to make a mortal error.
They have
And that's
humility.
exactly like that's really that line of defense. It's like they're not going to mess up. Like they might not come in there and kill it right away, but they're not going to mess up, and so they're not going to go away.
And they're probably going to do it until they figure it out.
Yeah.
What's the best? Okay, so what's the best? I guess I was going to say that I have found that making errors has helped me learn. Essentially, trying things, you take chances, you see what works and what doesn't. And anytime you're making a market, like there is some risk of being adversely selected, and if you don't, the only way to have zero chance of that is just to not participate. And so, how much learning by how aggressive, I guess, should you be if you want to like learn quickly? Sorry, I did. This isn't a very well structured question at all, but what I'm getting at is just the fact that like I feel like you don't learn unless you make mistakes,
Well,
but
ask what's the
you don't want those
best.
mistakes to be so
How about
costly,
this,
right?
Rufus? What's the best way for Rufus to learn? Like,
Or not,
Yeah,
or anybody starting
well, I like
in a new
focusing on
market.
you because you're here.
yeah, no, the best way to learn is do what you're doing, which is to actively trade it and the mistakes are gonna be the education. I mean, like well, I'll use a story again from like the markets. Like for what was it, 2021, like we had the GameStop stuff, you had um SoftBank coming in, lifting all those call options or whatever. All the market makers got worked on that stuff. They all got beat up. Like the best traders in the world are all being turned upside down on these trades because in their model, it's like you don't have this model of like, oh, somebody is going to come along and just like power lift all this volume of call options. Like nobody has ever done that before. Brand new thing that can happen. And then what happens is like he lifts all them, they all get beat up. Again, their last line of defense is position sizing. At the end of the day, you never bet enough to risk opening shop tomorrow. So they get to open shop tomorrow, but now they get to open shop tomorrow with a button that says, oh, when I see the signature of flow come in looking like this, like I don't know what it's like to be at SIG today, but I imagine they poker bought the hell out of the options market. So it looks like, oh, there's this many contracts have come in to buy in this span of time through this broker. Um, I update that there's probably 40,000 more to buy behind it. And those contracts are non-economic. The people that are buying those contracts have never thought of the word volatility before in their life. Okay. They're just coming in here and buying these calls because everybody got on a message board and decided to do that. So they're non-economic buyers. So I'm going to push the price. But what happens is I'm going to do it faster. Because before I stood there and just took it on the chin while they lifted me higher and higher and higher. And now I'm just going to rip the market higher. I might even go rip the offers myself, push the thing up to a level where I feel really comfortable selling these things. And so now I always think about it as like they see these signatures and it's like hit SoftBank button and all their option streaming quotes update to that model. Right. Like I'm being a little facetious here, but it's like that's what I'm thinking. It's like an old school Excel macro that's just like run these sheets, which is just the accumulation of learning. It's this library of, hey, I've seen this pattern of behavior before, and I'm going to fit my markets to it. And then what'll happen is I'll run this model and I will end up running it a little bit too long because the regime will change and I won't have realized necessarily that it has changed. And I'll probably run it a little too long and I'll get tagged on the back end of this a little bit. And then I'll update my model again and run a new one for the next regime. But the thing is, I want to run the best model I can while this regime happens to be going on. I'll make as much money as possible. And I recognize that I'm going to pay a tax on this on the way out because I'm going to overfit to this and I'm going to be stale when the world changes. I think it's just having this understanding of what the waves in the business look like. This is how the nature of the game. And it's like if you're so indexed on like I need to be making money all the time, and the fact that I'm getting worked on the tail end of this regime change is making this whole business feel existential to me or whatever. It's like your expectations were wrong. That was going to happen, and you should know that going into it. So
Yeah.
I think that's like the end of the day, like there's no like how do I do this so like I make money all the time? It's like it's not going to happen. I'm going to make a bunch of mistakes. I'm going to update my library of what can happen, and then I'm going to run that program when that signature comes back in vogue. And over time, I'm building a bigger and bigger and bigger library of these things where I'm more resilient. And one day something completely new will happen. I won't be prepared for it, but neither will anybody else. And my risk management keeps me alive.
I mean,
I
this
think
is
that's
like
the hardest thing, and because that isn't really there isn't a real good parallel in sports there, because it's
well, but like they're like there may not be yet, Rufus, but if you think about like the interview we did with Domer, right? Part of him understanding was like things that he saw in the market that he knew who the people were behind them and how to respect those kind of trades versus how to respect. That's essentially what we're saying here. It's like the
right.
signature of a trade. Whereas, Kris, am I interpreting this correctly?
Yeah, I'm
Well,
not
the
familiar with what
GameStop thing
Domer,
was
Domer was saying, but yeah, I think that there's this idea of a signature is like or a pattern that you've kind of noticed is you're fitting to that pattern. You're going to try to make as much money as you can while that pattern exists. But at the same time, you're in an environment where other people are adapting to the pattern too. And so maybe the
But
pattern ends, maybe it just gets over, there's too many predators.
or you find some bot that, I mean, that has a certain signature in its contracts and the way it works, and you're like, okay, I understand what its vulnerabilities are. I know I can push it this way, and then it evolves, right? But I think one thing that's been really interesting is now that, I mean, from Kalshi, I have a data set with, over 500,000 individual trades that have been put in, and I can run the numbers and see what my ROI has been based on how big the fills are, all these different things, and it's been really interesting. And actually,
You got one more serious question for Kris, and I got one or two more fun questions.
Okay, this is kind of along those lines, but how do you identify adverse selection in a market where people are trying to deceive you, where they are trying to mask what they're doing rather than just taking, it's easy to see if you get 150,000 contracts snapped up of something when you're expecting like three at a time.
Hmm.
But when someone's sort of playing that game of flying under the radar, how do you go about like trying to figure out if you're being adversely selected?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about adverse, I mean, you're already kind of hinted at it there. The thing about adverse selection is if you actually know something, the challenge is whether it's betting or whether it's options is how you're going to get down, how you're going to get the
Mhm.
liquidity, how you're going to get these off. And um, I think that for the most part, if somebody wants to keep doing something with you, you should you probably need to update really hard on that unless you have a reason to know why they might be doing that and what like why might somebody be doing this without them having information. So for example, somebody trading really big might be trading really big because they're forced to, because they have to get out of something. So that would be an example of something where somebody has to be very, very aggressive, but they're not, but it's not necessarily adverse selection. It might be adverse selection in the sense that like your first trades against them are going to be bad simply
Mhm.
because they have a lot to do. So you'll regret your first trades. But overall, the soundness of trading against this counterparty is fine. So that would be one way somebody would trade aggressive because they're sort of forced to. And so you have to be able to reason about like, is it reasonable to think that somebody would be forced to buy this? I don't know what the context of that might be in sports betting, but
Somebody
or
laying off action or something. Maybe it's some offshore bookie that has a ton of liability somewhere and wants
there
to, you know,
that could be exactly. So it could be somebody that you think is basically acting uneconomically because they have to be really aggressive. But the problem, like in options, the issue that I would always have is that it's like the string raise ultimately. It's like the broker comes to you, like say in like the voice market, and they say, I'm five bid for, 1,000 of these things, and what can I find sold? And then, they 2 minutes later, hey, you have any more there? I'm five bid for another 1,000. And I'm like, then you have this conversation, this like this thing where it's like, well, how many do you have? Like, oh, I don't know. The customer just gave it to me like this. It's like I don't know if the broker's holding 10 and he's piecing them out, or if the client doesn't trust him and he's string raising the broker too, and in turn he's doing that to me. Like it's this just cat and mouse game, and his job is to like try to get the best fill he can for him, and my job is to not get run over. So but anybody trying to repeatedly do the same thing, sometimes it's really obvious. And it's really obvious when you're really wrong. The great thing is like it's really obvious when you're really wrong
yeah.
because now the time is picking them. Like there's a lot of urgency on their part, and it's like, hey, whatever the heck thing I think is going to happen pretty soon. I need to get as many of these off as I can. And I'm five bid, and it's like, how are you now? Okay, I'm at 510. I'll take those. How are you now? At five and a quarter. I'll take those. And you're like, oh Jesus, this is going real. I'm definitely in trouble. So the so it's kind of like the adverse selection thing has to do mostly with aggression. If they're trying to adverse select against you in like a passive way, that's a bit, I mean, it happens, but it's a bit, it just doesn't make sense a lot of times where like if you know something, you really can't, it's really hard to be passive about wanting to get it off, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's the whole challenge for us if we're trying to get down a large position on something without affecting the market, right?
Yeah. So,
If you
so
put
what
up
are
a
the,
huge
what are the
offer,
techniques?
like suddenly you scare people. They're like, "Oh, okay," and you can spook the whole market.
And I don't know I don't know what the rule, like I don't, for example, can you spoof in prediction markets? Like, can you basically
Well,
show
spook.
size on the offer when you're really a buyer?
I don't. I mean, it's CFTC regulated, so it's the same. Like
Mm,
you cannot, I
yeah, you
believe,
can't do
put
that
up
then.
something that you don't want taken.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the whole like uh the whole game of deception, but it feels like if you're on the other side of the deception there, like as far as like a passive deception, it you're not you're not losing as being a market maker. What's happening there is you're getting picked off as a customer. And that's not really your concern as much here. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, for example, these rolls that happen and these like products that have like these massive open interest and like these option ETFs where like everybody knows that the guy's going to come roll on like, whatever, Thursday. Well, he comes in and by the time he rolls the trade, he gets filled mid-market on this gigantic order. And you look at it, if you're a passive bystander, you look at this and you say, how the hell did he get filled on 100,000 contracts mid-market? How did that happen? And the reason is because the market makers have been walking that market down for the past week. And they set the table. Yeah. And then he comes in and he offers, and then you lift him. Now, do you want to call that customer adversely selected against by the market makers? I mean, that doesn't really fit my definition of that so much as like the market makers have set this up in a way where this is the market. They're trying to find like the market clearing price for that liquidity. Had they not walked the market down and he came in and he offered the 100,000, who's to say it wouldn't have traded at a similar price? They would have just been like, yeah, I'm no bid for this thing. I'm nowhere in line at all. Because it's the wrong price to take down.
You can argue that's market. You could argue they're manipulating the market for given what they know they're going to get filled out in the future.
Yeah, you can say that they're front running it, but you could also say that. But then the counter argument to that is, if they are front running it, and if the price is that egregious, then while they were walking the market down, why didn't you go?
They would have gotten run over then, right?
Right. Exactly. So I am not like. I think to call it manipulation is to say in my mind, I'm like, well, I don't know. Then you can go ahead and lift them if you think it's so manipulated. Whereas I think that what they're doing is they are trying to find like that market clearing price. And yes, they're trying to make money, but right. I don't think you're being adversely selected against. As a matter of fact, you can't be adversely selected against because in a sense, you could just not trade.
Exactly.
Right. So, I don't think that's a passive actor is adversely selecting somebody else. I mean, I guess you can twist things to sort of sound like that, but it doesn't. It's a little far-fetched into how I think about it.
All right, Kris, we're going to get you out of here. I'm going to ask you one fun question. So you run these trading camps for your kids. I like am fascinated in your Risk of Ruin about games and games you play. You played a lot of Monopoly. Did you ever play Catan?
Yeah.
Do you have any kind
of... That was the gateway drug.
Do you have any kind of strategy for Catan? Like what is the over? Because I play a lot of Catan, and I'd be hard pressed to believe I'm getting any better at it. Like, there's so much randomness to it that it's a game. But like if you had one overarching strategy that you would give someone for Catan, what it would be?
I could just say that what I generally, when I played a ore and wheat strategy, and that was yeah. And by the way, it's not like I was playing with a bunch of sharps. It was like you playing with your family, or whatever. But generally speaking, I would do that because just looking at it feels like the 2-pointer versus the 3-pointer in basketball. It's like the city is the compounder in the game. Right. So it was like, okay, it feels to me like I'm getting a lot more throughput on trying to get as much ore and wheat as I can so that I can get all the other things that I need. And then I would like to have a port where I can get liquidity because I'm going to be accumulating all this ore and wheat at really fast pace. And I need a way to generate the things I'm not going to be able to get. So that was, I mean, it's not, I don't know if that's sophisticated or anything. It's just,
no, I like it.
That's just what I did.
Also, ore and wheat is used if you could. I think that the first few moves are really big to be able to build a city or a development, whatever, or a city, like basically
there's a settlement in a city.
A settlement, sorry, not a development. A settlement. Like somebody that's picking up a dev card at the beginning or just building a road and not really like. I mean, I feel like it's because of the magic of compounding, right? Like
compounding, you always want to do it early.
So if you get it exactly, if you can get a settlement early or a city early, and I feel like if you're you can get a city pretty quickly potentially.
Yep. I mean, that's the strategy. That's the way. I mean, I feel like always with any of these games, it's always like where is the like finding that compounding synergy is like as fast as you can is like always the thing that's like what you're supposed to do.
What's the compounding synergy in Monopoly?
So the thing about Monopoly is I think it just comes down to the fact that you just recognize which, that the orange property is the best. And so you have to, those are the properties one lands on the most in the game because they're the ones that when you're coming out of jail and, over the course of a game, there's some expected value of how many times an individual is going to go to jail. And so then where are those properties sitting? They're like, oh God, are they
Six or
six,
seven
eight,
spots
six, eight,
from
and
you.
nine, or six, seven, and nine, coming out of jail, right? So it's that death corner over there where it's St. James and Kentucky and also there's a card that goes not just to them, but there's a card that also takes you to Virginia, I think Virginia. So you're right in striking distance of the orange coming off that. So again, I don't know if that's like a compounding strategy so much as like that's just the way the board's laid out and where
That's
the
just an
probability.
inefficient. That's a market inefficiency, right?
Yeah. So that's that. I mean, I don't know. That's the monopoly thing.
Do you ever bring it down the house question you want to ask me? I mean, I feel like you read the book, so like maybe there's something or
Yeah.
sports
Um.
betting question you want to ask Rufus?
The bringing down that house question would be what is the uh I guess what to you in you're so removed from it now.
Hmm.
How do you think about that part of your life today as a man that has children, is grown, and like, I don't know, there's a wildness to that story that I think that one might reflect on in an interesting way when they're so much older.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think part of it is that the story has like a lot of acts, right? The first act is when I did it. The second act is like when we wrote a book about it. And the third act is the movie, and then probably now the last act is how I'm living right now. And I think part of it is, again with these kids that are young, them starting to like uncover pieces of it and ask me things like, "Oh, so you can't play blackjack anywhere because you're so good, or you can't like," and like they kind of like, and one of the things that I'm doing right now is I run a math club at my 8-year-old's school. It's half an hour once a week, and programming that. I think at the end of the year, I will teach them like blackjack and concepts of blackjack. But I've started teaching them a little bit about expected value. I've done a whole thing around that because I'm trying to teach them a little bit about deterministic versus probabilistic thinking. So like the question that you asked is, I mean, a lot of that feels surreal, but like some of it was just very mundane back at the time. It was like you're just going and like running this very boring system that you're just sitting there and you're like a robot and like whatnot. But then something crazy happens, or you're staying in a really nice suite. So I don't know. I think it's probably manifests itself in a way that like nothing ever feels that weird to me, like in the situations that I'm in. But it's also like something that I think will change over time as my kids learn more and more about it. So,
Cool.
Roof, you got anything? Or you have
I
anything
don't.
for Roof? All right, Chris, thank you
Good.
so much for joining us. This has been a ton of fun. Hopefully, you raise the collective intelligence of our 7 listeners during this time. So,
You
It
raised
was
my
a total
intelligence at
privilege,
least.
guys. Like, so this was surreal for me. Very cool. Thank you.
thanks. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Chris.
Bet, bet, bet the process.